My in-laws had recently moved into a sleek, new designer apartment, seemingly thriving in their newfound comfort. One morning, Derek, my father-in-law, lashed out at me without warning. "Why didn't you see your husband off to work? What kind of wife are you?" he demanded. Caught off guard, I tried to explain. "I had an urgent work call and couldn't make it in time," I said calmly. But Sloan, my mother-in-law, didn't miss the chance to pile on. With a mocking smile, she added, "You know, I've always said being a stay-at-home wife isn't a real job. Honestly, you're like a parasite." Derek nodded in agreement. "Our son works hard outside the home, bringing in more than you ever could. You should respect him and do your part as his wife. Frankly, you're just useless." Their words cut deep, but what angered me more was their audacity. These were people living in my house, rent-free, yet they had no qualms about belittling me. I couldn't hold back any longer. "Respect him? How can I respect someone when his parents treat me like this?" I said firmly. Sloane's face twisted in shock. "I can't believe it," she gasped. "Anyone who talks like that isn't family. A stranger like you doesn't belong here. You should leave." Derek quickly backed her up. "Exactly, you can leave. We'll stay with our son and pay rent, $300 a month." For a moment, I was speechless. $300? Are they serious? But I'd had enough. I wasn't going to argue with people who clearly had no respect for me. "Fine, I'll leave," I said, my voice steady. It was in that moment I realized I was done. Done with their insults, done with their entitlement, and done with sacrificing my peace for people who didn't appreciate me. "My name is Jenna Davis. I'm a 30-year-old graphic designer who works from home, and my business is thriving. I make a solid income, more than enough to stand on my own. My husband, Eric, works a typical office job. We've been married for 3 years, but lately, his true colors have been showing. At first, he seemed considerate, he'd help with chores when asked, but his attitude told a different story. Among his friends, he'd boast. Household chores are a woman's job, so I let my wife handle it. I'd been blind to this side of him until after we got married. Initially, we lived in a modest rental apartment, but that changed when a water leak from the upstairs unit damaged some of our belongings. After some back and forth with the landlord, we got a small compensation and decided to move. Eric, excitedly showing me a website for a luxury apartment near the station, said, "Hey, Jenna, let's move here next." The rent was $3,000, more than double the $1,200 we were paying. "I'd rather save for our future kids," I replied, hesitant. But Eric was persistent. "I've always wanted to live in a place like this," he said. "If we combine our incomes, we can afford it. Living somewhere so stylish might even inspire you to work more, and if it's too much, we'll move again, please." Reluctantly, I agreed. The lease was signed under his name, but I contributed to the rent as promised. The apartment was stunning, and I admit, it boosted my motivation for work, but there was one downside I hadn't anticipated. Eric's parents, Derek and Sloan, became more involved in our lives. Derek had retired early at 60 and spent most of his time at home. Sloan, who had never worked, was always a housewife. My relationship with them had always been strained. Even when Eric and I visited their old apartment, they treated me like an afterthought. "Eric, so glad you're here," they'd exclaim warmly, ignoring me entirely. "Hello, Father, hello, Mother," I would greet them politely. "Oh, Jenna, you're here too," Sloan would say with a dismissive glance. I often found myself awkwardly standing by as they doted on Eric. Once, Derek even barked at me. "Hey, make some snacks for the drinks." Sloan, meanwhile, was busy taking selfies with Eric for her social media. She loved flaunting luxury items online, though I later discovered most were rentals. Reluctantly, I made snacks for Derek, only to hear him grumble. "What's this? It's so bland." Sloan smirked. Poor Eric, stuck with such a useless wife. And Eric? He sat there, pretending not to hear a word. His constant need to appease his parents had always irked me, but I chose to ignore it. After all, I thought keeping my distance from them would be enough. But a month after we moved into the new apartment, just before our wedding anniversary, everything came to a head. I had planned a small celebration at home, gathering ingredients for a quiet toast between Eric and me. Just as we were about to raise our glasses, the door swung open. Without knocking, Derek and Sloan walked in, as if they owned the place. Father, Mother, I said, startled by their sudden arrival. Happy anniversary, we thought we'd join you for the celebration, they said with uninvited cheerfulness. I looked at Eric, confused and a bit frustrated. He smiled and welcomed them in, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I was still trying to process the situation when I noticed the large bags they were carrying. Father, Mother, what's going on, and what are those big bags? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Sloan began looking around the apartment with exaggerated delight. Oh, the designer aesthetic here is just marvelous. It's like a dream to live in a place like this, she gushed. Derek casually added. Didn't Eric tell you? We've decided to give up our old place. Our things will be here tomorrow. From now on, you'll be taking care of us properly, just like a good wife should. I turned to Eric in disbelief. What? Eric, looking unfazed, explained. Well, it was time to renew my parents' lease, and since we have extra space, I thought, why not live together? Sloan shot me a questioning glance. What's with that look? Do you have a problem with us staying here? She demanded. Yeah, what's the issue? Derek echoed, equally insistent. And just like that, I found myself living with my in-laws. From that point forward, life became an endless battle. Derek, with his sense of entitlement, started ordering me around, demanding alcohol and making me do chores. Once, he even tossed a pile of laundry at me as if I were his servant. Meanwhile, Sloan treated the apartment like her personal stage for social media, using my clothes and shoes without permission and showcasing our home as if it were her own. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, they would belittle me. Exhausted, I turned to Eric. The way your parents treat me is awful, I complained, hoping he would understand. Don't worry about it, he responded dismissively, brushing off my concerns. It wasn't just the in-laws, I was growing resentful of Eric too. He wasn't taking me seriously. Then, one day, Eric came home early, looking frustrated. What's wrong? I asked, concerned. My company just told me they're transferring me to a retail store, he said, his voice dripping with irritation. A transfer? Isn't that a good opportunity? I asked, puzzled. No, I refused it. I thought it was a joke, so I got angry and quit the company, he replied nonchalantly, loosening his tie and flopping onto the sofa. What? I gasped in shock. How could you just quit? What about the rent? Eric shrugged. Your income is nearly $10,000 a month, right? That should be enough to cover everything, he said nonchalantly. Are you serious? I demanded, my anger rising. And don't tell my parents, Eric added casually. I don't want them worrying. I'll find a new job soon, so don't stress about it. I was fuming, but there was nothing I could do. I couldn't just abandon my unemployed husband. From that day on, I was left to juggle the housework, pay for all the living expenses, and cover the rent for 4 people. Meanwhile, Eric left every morning in his suit, pretending everything was normal and trying to keep his parents in the dark about his job loss. At first, I thought he was searching for a new job, but then I noticed he wasn't coming home until late in the day. One afternoon, I followed him and found out he was gambling away his unemployment benefits. After a heated argument, he made it clear he had no intention of changing his ways. Instead, he began mocking me for being so busy with work. One morning, I was rushing around, trying to finish some tasks after a late night of work. I managed to make breakfast for my late-rising in-laws and Eric, who was still sitting at the dining table reading the newspaper. As I washed the dishes, Sloan spoke up, her tone irritated. Jenna, this fried egg is too hard. I paused, confused. What? I made it the way I always do. I only eat soft-boiled fried eggs, Derek interjected sharply. Make it again, now, he ordered. Just as I was about to argue, my phone rang, a client calling. I answered, and as I spoke, Eric shot me an annoyed look, clicking his tongue before getting up and leaving without touching his breakfast. Once I hung up, my in-laws stood in front of me with crossed arms, clearly upset. Is something wrong? I asked, bewildered. You need to get your act together, Derek said coldly. How could you not see your husband off when he's going to work? I had a work call. I couldn't see him off, I explained, my voice trembling but honest. Sloan scoffed. You know, I've always said that working from home isn't a real job. You're just like a parasite. Derek chimed in again. Obviously, Eric's work outside the home is more important. Respect your husband more. You're a useless wife, he spat. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Respect Eric? I snapped. He quit his job on a whim and doesn't even bother to find a new one. And yet you're berating me, living in my house without contributing anything? The words hit them like a slap, and their faces turned red with fury. How dare you? Sloan sputtered. Someone who talks like that isn't family. A stranger like you should leave. Exactly, Derek agreed. We'll stay with our son. You should get out. We'll pay $300 for rent. I was momentarily stunned. $300 for rent? The actual rent is $3,000. How can they be this clueless? But the decision was made. I wouldn't stay in a place where I was disrespected any longer. Understood. I'll leave, I replied, keeping my voice calm and ignoring their taunts. I packed my things and left. I moved into a weekly apartment, where I finally found some peace. A few weeks later, Eric called me repeatedly. Reluctantly, I answered. He wanted to meet and talk. I figured it was time to face him, so I agreed. When I arrived at the restaurant, I was taken aback to see that Eric had brought his parents along. Before I could ask what was going on, Eric spoke quickly. Hey, Jenna, what do you mean by getting a divorce? I won't accept it. Don't you dare divorce me without my consent. I replied calmly. Oh, you saw the divorce papers I sent. Eric's face went pale, and my in-laws shot me furious glares. Your parents have been harassing me every day since they moved in, I said, my voice steady. You never listened to any of my complaints. My words seemed to shake him. You're divorcing me over that? Eric asked, disbelief in his voice. Don't think you can just walk away. I won't agree to it. His parents were equally shocked, but Sloan spoke up. Eric, why would you want to stay with someone like her? We said we could pay $300 for rent, didn't we? At that, I couldn't help but laugh. $300? That's just the parking fee. I pulled out the rent bill from my bag. The actual rent is $3,000. Sloane's face turned ashen. $3,000? She stammered. Then how much have you been paying all this time? Everything, I said flatly. I've been covering all the expenses with my own income, the same income you both dismissed as being from a parasite. We didn't know, Sloan cried, her voice shaky. Eric, his head in his hands, whispered, I'm sorry, Jenna, please come back. I can't live without you. What about your parents? I asked coldly. They don't seem sorry. Eric glanced at them and then urged, apologize. They muttered weak apologies, but I had made up my mind. I don't intend to come back, and I want a divorce. I'll never forgive any of you. We will never meet again, I said firmly. Eric broke down into tears, but I turned and walked away, leaving him and his trembling parents behind. Later, I finalized the divorce through a lawyer, securing most of the assets as alimony, leaving Eric with almost nothing. I then exposed my in-law's behavior on social media. As a result, my mother-in-law's account was flooded with criticism, and she eventually deleted it. Unable to afford the $3,000 rent, they were evicted. They moved into a shabby apartment. Eric found a new job, but it paid far less than his previous one, and he couldn't support his parents anymore. My father-in-law had to take a job in a factory, and Sloan, having shut down her social media, lost the will to even leave the house. As for me, I moved into a designer apartment that was perfect for single living. Without the stress of that toxic environment, my work flourished, and I even adopted a cat I adore. My life is on the rise again, and I'm determined to build it positively from here on out.